They built their hell out of gratitude. Commander Elias Thorne stood on the command deck of the Terran Mandate ship Indemnity. Before him, the main viewer displayed the tranquil blue-green marble of Kepler 186f, a world humanity had christened Sanctuary. It was supposed to be a ghost colony, a silent monument to a failed terraforming effort from centuries past. Instead, it was alive and it was caged. A fleet of alien vessels sharp and obsidian like shards of volcanic glass hung in orbit. Their energy signatures were a low, constant hum of oppression. We did not come here looking for a fight, but for a memory. His first officer, Kalen, shifted his weight beside him, the fabric of his uniform rustling in the bridge's near-perfect silence. Their fleet is Krathan Hegemony Standard. Kalen murmured, his voice tight with professional restraint. They're claiming salvage and wardship under the old interstellar compacts. The words tasted like ash. Wardship was a legal fiction, a polite term for servitude. Thorne knew that within a few hundred words, he would have to invoke the specter of a public inquiry, dragging this whole rotten affair into the light of a star court. The alternative was a silence that would condemn millions. Logos. Thorne said, his voice calm, addressing the fleet mind woven into the ship's every system. Give me the Krathan legal precedent summary. Focus on their application of the gratitude tithe. The air shimmered faintly as the AI's presence manifested as a soft blue light near the holotank. Query processed, its synthesized voice resonated devoid of emotion but full of data. The Krathan hegemony has invoked the gratitude tithe doctrine 17 times in the last standard century. In each case, they rendered aid to a developing or stranded civilization. They then levied a perpetual resource and labor tax as compensation for their benevolence. The price of their kindness was a chain forged from law. A transmission request blinked on the console of Communications Officer Jenna Arden. Commander, she announced, her tone clipped. The Krathan Proctor is hailing us. Audio only. He wishes to welcome us to his protectorate. Thorne's jaw tightened. The arrogance was a weapon in itself. On screen, Jenna. Let's hear what the zookeeper has to say. The bridge lights dimmed slightly, focusing attention on the main viewer, where the image of Sanctuary was replaced by a static Krathan sigil. This was not a negotiation. It was the first move in a war of jurisprudence. The voice that filled the bridge was smooth-cultured and utterly devoid of warmth. This is Proctor Valerius of the Krathan hegemony. You are addressing the legal guardians of the Sanctuary colony. State your vessel's name and intent. Thorne stepped forward, his boots making no sound on the deck plating. The scent of ozone from the recycling scrubbers was sharp in his nostrils. Proctor Valerius, this is Commander Elias Thorne of the Terran Mandate ship Indemnity. Our intent is to make contact with a lost human colony. He let the words hang, a clear and deliberate challenge to the Proctor's claim of ownership. There are lines you do not cross with humanity, and a bill of sale for our children is one of them. A low, resonant chuckle echoed from the speakers, a sound like stones grinding together. Commander, you are mistaken. There is no lost colony here. There is only a thriving world brought back from the brink of extinction by our charity. A charity for which they are deeply grateful. The emphasis on the last word was a stiletto. Their gratitude is accounted for, measured, and paid in regular installments. It is the foundation of our mutual prosperity. Thorne's gaze flickered to the readout from Logos, showing the impossibly high energy drain from the planet's surface, far exceeding any reasonable industrial output. They weren't just taxing them, they were exsanguinating a world. Proctor Thorne said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that carried more weight than a shout. We require proof of consent. We require access to the ledgers detailing this arrangement. Under the Galactic Compact Article 12, Section 4, a wardship claim over a sentient species requires transparent accounting, open to review by any signatory power. He was laying the first brick in a legal wall, a wall he intended to build around the proctor until the only way out was through the truth. The universe did not run on force alone. It ran on the vast, complex machinery of interstellar law. There was a pause. The silence stretched thick with unspoken threats. The hum of the indemnity's life support seemed to grow louder, a steady, patient heartbeat. "Your request is noted," Commander the Proctor said finally, his voice now cold and stripped of its earlier condescension. "We will prepare the necessary documentation for your review. Be aware, however, that Sanctuary is a delicate ecosystem, both socially and politically. Your presence may be a destabilizing factor. A veiled threat, clear as day. Interfere and people will get hurt." But humanity had learned long ago that the only thing more dangerous than interference was inaction. The transmission ended. The Krathen sigil vanished, replaced once more by the agonizingly beautiful view of the captive world. Kalen let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. He's daring us to challenge him. He thinks the compact is a shield for him to hide behind. Jenna swiveled in her chair, her face pale. "Commander, their initial data packet is coming through. It's a public ledger, but the entries are redacted. The currency is listed as gratitude units. There are no conversions, no explanations. It's a mockery of transparency. It was worse than a mockery. It was a cage built from corrupted language." Before the main set piece of the legal confrontation began, the stakes needed to be felt, not just understood. On the surface of Sanctuary, in a small habitation unit carved from reddish rock, a young girl named Ilara watched a dust devil swirl outside her window. She traced the path of a cargo hauler in the sky, a dark scar against the orange sunset. Her father sat at the table, his shoulders slumped, staring at a small blinking datapad. The family's weekly tithe report. His right hand rested on the back of his neck, where a thin metallic collar was fused to his skin. They all wore them. Papa Ilara asked, her voice small. "Will the sky people help?" Her father looked up. His eyes were weary, but for the first time in a long time there was a flicker of something that wasn't despair. "They are human, Ilara. That means they might." He reached out and squeezed her hand. The collar on his neck pulsed with a faint violet light, a silent reminder of a debt that could never be paid. The Krathen called it a gratitude collar, a device to help regulate one's sense of obligation. In reality, it was a tool of control delivering painful feedback for thoughts of dissent or rebellion. The real currency wasn't labor, it was hope, and the tax was designed to crush it, back on the indemnity. Thorne reviewed the data. It was an elegant prison of bureaucracy. The Krathen had documented every kilowatt of energy, every liter of purified water, every gram of synthesized protein they had provided to the fledgling colony decades ago. They had assigned an arbitrary value to it, a value so astronomical that the colony would be in their debt for 1,000 generations. They had saved them from extinction only to sentence them to eternity in a ledger. This was not justice. It was accounting as a weapon of mass subjugation. "Logos," Thorne commanded, pacing the polished deck of the ready room. "Begin a deep spectrum analysis of the Krathen fleet. I am not interested in their weapons. I want to know about their accounting systems. I want to know how they measure, store, and transmit their ledger data. Find the architecture of their lie." The AI's blue light pulsed. "Compliance." The task requires a novel approach. I will need to repurpose the primary sensor array from a tool of observation to a tool of forensic accounting. The process will be illuminating. The promise of numbers of hard data was the only comfort in a situation built on layers of legal deceit. You cannot argue with a feeling, but you can dismantle a fraudulent balance sheet. Kalen entered the room, his expression grim. Elias the Crathen have moved their ships. They're forming a tighter blockade. Not an act of war, but it's a clear message. They're locking the door. Thorn nodded, not taking his eyes from the display showing the colony's vital signs. Population stable, resource production declining, energy tithe increasing. They're strangling them, Kalen. Slowly enough that the Compact's automated watchdogs won't see it as an atrocity, but fast enough to make them feel it. A slow-motion genocide laundered through a legal framework. So what's the play? Kalen asked, his frustration evident. We can't break the blockade without becoming the aggressors. We can't sit here and watch them squeeze the life out of a human world. Jenna followed him in holding a data pad. There is a way, she said, her voice steady. The proctor agreed to a review. We can force a public inquiry. It's an old, rarely used provision of the Compact, designed for disputes of this exact nature. We can compel him to defend his wardship, not just to us, but to a quorum of signatory worlds. The cost of this path was time, a resource the colonists were running out of. Thorn stopped pacing. He looked at his officers, then at the silent watching glow of Logos. Do it, he said. File the petition. Cite Article 12, but also cite Article 37, the right of sentient affirmation. The Crathen claim the colonists are grateful. We're going to give them a public forum to express it. It was a high-risk gambit. If the colonists were too terrified to speak, their silence would be seen as consent, legally cementing the Crathen's control forever. But if even one of them spoke the truth, the proctor's entire case would begin to unravel. We will give them a weapon, and that weapon will be their own voice. The petition was filed. The response from the Crathen was almost instantaneous. They accepted. Proctor Valerius was confident, arrogant even. He believed his legal framework was impenetrable. He believed the gratitude collars would ensure the colonists' compliance. The inquiry was set. A neutral data space would be established, a virtual courtroom overseen by arbiters from 3 different galactic powers, their identities shielded until the proceedings began. The Indemnity and the Crathen fleet would hold their positions, their conflict now moved from the cold of space to the cold, hard logic of the law. There would be no missiles fired, only arguments. There would be no hulls breached, only doctrines. Thorn stood before the holotank, where Logos was running simulations of the upcoming inquiry. Millions of permutations predicting the proctor's likely arguments and Jenna's possible rebuttals. Logos, Thorn asked quietly. What is the primary flaw in the Crathen's legal position? The blue light of the AI seemed to brighten. The flaw is not legal, Commander. It is mathematical. Their stated energy expenditure in rescuing the colony does not align with the geological and atmospheric data from that period. They have inflated the invoice. A simple, profound truth. The foundation of their claim was a lie. The greatest evils are often built upon the most mundane of sins. In this case, it was fraudulent accounting. Can you prove it? Thorn asked. The data is circumstantial based on long-range planetary scans. To prove it conclusively, I would need direct, unshielded sensor readings from the planet's crust and the Crathen fleet's energy logs, access to which we will not be granted. Then we will have to make them grant it, Thorn said, a plan beginning to form in his mind. A plan that did not involve asking for permission. Jenna, focus your arguments on the principle of proportionality. A debt must be proportional to the service rendered. Kalen. I want you to run silent drills. Prepare the ship for a high-energy wide-spectrum sensor burst disguised as a recalibration of our primary systems. Kalen's eyes lit up with understanding. A recalibration that just happens to be aimed directly at their fleet and the planet's core. Thorn nodded. It's a breach of protocol. If we're caught, they could have us sanctioned. But if Logos is right, the data we get will be the key to unlocking that entire world. The risk was immense, but the stakes were higher. The law was their chosen battlefield, but they would not fight with one hand tied behind their back. Justice requires a sharp eye, a steady hand, and sometimes a willingness to bend the rules. As the hour of the inquiry approached, another vignette of life on Sanctuary unfolded. An old man, a teacher named Ben, gathered a small group of children in a hidden alcove away from the watchful eyes of the Krathan enforcers. He wasn't teaching them history or science. He was teaching them a story, a memory from before the Krathan came. The story of Earth. He spoke of a world where gratitude was a gift, not a tax, where help was given freely without a ledger attached. His collar pulsed a dull ache in his neck as he spoke of these forbidden ideas. But he continued planting seeds of defiance in the minds of the next generation. Remember, he whispered, his voice cracking with age and emotion. We are not their property. We are human. The corridor of law materialized. It was not a physical place, but a shared quantum state, a courtroom of pure information. Thorn found himself standing in a vast, minimalist space. Polished white floors stretched to an infinite horizon under a ceiling of soft gray light. He was at a simple lectern. Opposite him, perhaps 100 meters away, stood the manifested form of Proctor Valerius. He appeared as a tall, gaunt figure, in flowing black robes, his face an impassive mask. Between them, 3 shimmering, translucent columns of light appeared. The Arbiters. Their forms were indistinct, their voices a harmonized chorus of pure logic. The public inquiry is convened, the Arbiters announced as one. The subject is the legitimacy of the Krathan hegemony's wardship over the human colony on Kepler 196F, known as Sanctuary. Commander Elias Thorn of the Terran Mandate has petitioned for review. Proctor Valerius of the Krathan hegemony will now state the foundation of his claim. This was the moment, the beginning of the end, one way or another. Proctor Valerius's voice was as smooth and cold as the virtual floor. Arbiters. Commander. The hegemony's claim is simple and just. 80 standard years ago, our survey ships discovered this colony on the verge of collapse. Their atmospheric processors were failing. Their food synthesizers were contaminated. We intervened. We rebuilt their infrastructure. We saved them from certain death. He gestured expansively, as if bestowing a great gift. In return, we asked for only one thing: their gratitude. A simple, perpetual tithe of their surplus production, a small price for their very existence. It is a contract to which they agreed, and a debt they honor. The lie was so clean, so elegantly presented. Thorn stepped forward. Arbiters, Commander Thorn. The Terran Mandate does not dispute that aid was rendered. What we dispute is the nature of the contract. A contract requires informed consent. A debt requires proportionality. He turned his gaze on the proctor. You have presented a ledger in gratitude units. Can you provide this inquiry with a conversion rate to a standard measure, to energy, to resources, to man-hours? He was not attacking the principle, but the implementation. He was chipping away at the edges of the lie. The most powerful truths are often delivered as simple questions. The proctor's form remained impassive. Gratitude is not a commodity, to be quantified in such crude terms, Commander. It is the very bedrock of a stable society. We have merely systematized it. The colonists understand its value. The condescension was back a cloak for his evasion. Do they, Thorn countered, pressing the advantage? Under the right of sentient affirmation, we request that a representative of the sanctuary colony be allowed to testify before this inquiry. Let us hear of their gratitude from their own lips. A gamble, a total system-scale gamble on the courage of a single oppressed human. A flicker of something annoyance, uncertainty crossed the Proctor's composed facade. He had not expected this. He had expected a debate about legal theory, not a confrontation with the subjects of his rule. The request is valid under the compact, the arbiters declared. A channel will be opened. Proctor Valerius, you will select a representative to speak on behalf of the colony. The Proctor had no choice but to comply. He would choose the most loyal, the most broken, the most terrified colonist he could find. He would choose a mouthpiece. But Thorn was betting on something the Proctor could never understand. He was betting on the stubborn, indomitable spark of human dignity. A spark that no caller could ever extinguish. The Proctor selected the colony's chief administrator, a man named Marcus. His image flickered into existence between the two lecterns, a hologram of a man stooped and gray. A prominent gratitude collar encircled his neck. He looked from the Proctor to Thorn, his eyes wide with a carefully managed terror. He was the perfect witness for the prosecution. Administrator Marcus the Proctor began, his voice gentle, paternal. Please tell the arbiters how the Krythan hegemony has guided your people to prosperity. Tell them of your gratitude. Marcus swallowed hard. His gaze was fixed on the Proctor's robed form. We are grateful, he began, his voice trembling. The Krythans saved us. They provide for us. The tithe is our duty. It is how we show our appreciation. Each word was a struggle, a carefully rehearsed line delivered under duress. The collar on his neck glowed with a steady, placid light. To the arbiters it would look like calm assent. But Thorn saw the subtle tension in the man's jaw, the slight tremor in his hands. He was a prisoner reading a script written by his jailer. Thorn did not challenge the man's words directly. That would be a fool's errand. Instead, he addressed the arbiters. Arbiters, the administrator's collar is a standard Krythan model, is it not? A gratitude collar. That is correct, they replied. And its function, as per the manufacturer's public specifications, is to encourage a positive and cooperative mindset by providing gentle biofeedback. Is that also correct? The arbiters confirmed. Thorn turned his attention back to the holographic administrator. Administrator Marcus, could you please describe for the inquiry the sensation of this gentle biofeedback when you feel ungrateful? The game had changed. He was no longer questioning the debt, but the instrument of its collection. A wave of panic washed over Marcus's face. The Proctor's form seemed to stiffen. This was a line of questioning he had not anticipated. Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. The collar on his neck began to pulse faster, now its light shifting from placid blue to an angry violet. The pain must have been immense. He was caught in an impossible trap. To speak the truth was to invite agony. To lie was to condemn his people forever. The silence stretched a damning testimony in itself. The truth does not always need a voice. Sometimes its absence is enough. The witness is under duress. The arbiters stated their collective voice flat and analytical. The biofeedback from his collar is exceeding standard operational parameters. Proctor Valerius, your instrument of gratitude appears to be functioning as a tool of coercion. The first crack in the facade. It was small, but it was there. The proctor, for the first time, seemed to be on the defensive. The device is merely responding to his emotional distress, arbiters. He is overwhelmed by the gravity of this forum. A weak excuse, and everyone in the corridor of law knew it. Thorn pressed on his voice like ice. Or perhaps he is distressed because he is being compelled to lung. Let's return to the numbers. The numbers do not feel distress. The numbers do not lie. He signaled to Logos. On the main holodisplay complex, energy flow diagrams began to form. Proctor, your ledgers claim you expended a certain amount of energy to stabilize Sanctuary's tectonic plates upon your arrival. A noble and costly act, to be sure. Thorn pointed to a specific data string. However, our long-range scans of the planet's geothermal history show no significant tectonic instability in that era. The planet was stable. He was not just accusing them of coercion anymore. He was accusing them of fraud on a planetary scale. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. The proctor's composure finally broke. Your scans are primitive. Your data is flawed. You dare to question the integrity of the hegemony's records. The outburst was a mistake. It was emotional. It was a confession of vulnerability. Thorn remained calm. I do. And I formally petition this inquiry for the right to verify. Allow the indemnity to conduct a full, unshielded sensor scan of Sanctuary and your fleet's historical energy logs. If your records are accurate, you have nothing to fear. The data will vindicate you completely. The gauntlet was thrown, a challenge the proctor could not refuse without admitting his guilt. To win by law, one must first become the embodiment of its principles, transparency, verification, and the relentless pursuit of evidence. The arbiters conferred for a moment that felt like an eternity. The columns of light shimmered, processing the request. Thorn held his breath. This was the pivot point of the entire conflict. The request is unprecedented, the arbiters finally declared. However, the charge of ledger falsification is a grave one. The petition is granted. The Krathan hegemony will lower its data shields to permit a forensic scan by the Terran vessel Indemnity. The scan will be monitored by us. Any deviation from the agreed-upon parameters will result in immediate termination of this inquiry and sanctions against the Terran mandate. They had won the motion. It was time for Kalen to perform his recalibration. The true cost of victory was always paid in risk. The inquiry was recessed pending the scan. Back on the bridge of the Indemnity, the tension was electric. Kalen was at the tactical station, his hands flying over the controls. Commander, the Krathan are lowering their data shields. They're complying. They must be confident we won't find anything. Jenna looked up from her console. Or they're hiding the data in a way they think we can't access. A deep system encryption, perhaps. Thorn stood by the command chair, his eyes on the main viewer. That's where they're wrong. Logos isn't just looking for files. It's looking for ghosts. For the echoes of energy that can't be erased. The past is never truly gone. It is merely archived. Logos, begin the scan, Thorn ordered. Full spectrum. I want every joule of energy accounted for from the day they arrived in this system to this very moment. The ship hummed as the main sensor array reconfigured its massive power conduits glowing with pent-up energy. A beam of pure data invisible to the naked eye shot out from the Indemnity, washing over the Krathan fleet and the planet below. It was an act of profound intrusion, a digital search warrant on a cosmic scale. They were not just reading the Krathan's mail, they were auditing their soul. On Sanctuary, the scan was felt as a strange, tingling sensation in the air, a whisper of static on the wind. The colonists looked up at the sky at the human ship hanging like a single bright star of hope. They didn't know what was happening, but they knew it was for them. In his hidden classroom, the old teacher Ben paused his story. He placed a hand on the cold stone wall of the alcove and smiled. "Something is changing," he whispered to the children. "The numbers are being counted." The universe itself seemed to be holding its breath. The data flooded into the Indemnity's core processors. Terabytes per second. A torrent of raw information that would have overloaded a lesser system. Logos absorbed it all, its blue light pulsing with intense concentration. It sifted, sorted, and cross-referenced 80 years of Krathen activity in the system. Thorn, Kalen, and Jenna watched the holotank where the AI was building a four-dimensional model of the energy flows. It was a web of staggering complexity. But within that web, there were inconsistencies, black holes in the accounting. Analysis complete. Logos announced, its voice calm as ever. "I have found the discrepancy, Commander. The energy signatures do not match the ledgers. The Krathen did not expend the vast energies they claimed on planetary stabilization. They expended them on something else." The holotank shifted, displaying a new model. It showed the Krathen fleet upon arrival. But it also showed a massive energy expenditure directed not at the planet, but away from it into deep space. A focused directional burst. A weapon discharge. Jenna gasped. "What was that? What did they shoot at?" Logos reoriented the model, tracing the path of the energy beam back in time across the light years. It terminated on a field of debris, the wreckage of a ship. The energy discharge matches the signature of a high-yield plasma cannon, Logos stated. The debris field is the remains of the original Sanctuary colony ship, the Odyssey. The Krathen did not find the colonists on the verge of collapse. They found them healthy. They destroyed their only means of escape. The truth was more horrific than Thorn had ever imagined. They weren't saviors. They were pirates. The foundation of their legal claim was not just a lie. It was a cover-up for an act of mass murder. They had stranded the colonists, then presented themselves as their rescuers, creating the very emergency they then took credit for solving. The gratitude tithe was not a payment for salvation. It was a ransom paid by the victims to their kidnappers. This changed everything. This was no longer a matter of civil law. It was a criminal proceeding. Justice would not come from a revised contract. It would come from a verdict. "Logos," Thorn said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Prepare the findings. Strip out all conjecture. Present only the raw data, the energy signature of their weapon, the trajectory, the wreckage analysis. And one more thing. I want you to calculate the total energy the Krathen have tithed from Sanctuary over the last 80 years. And I want you to project it live into the corridor of law." He looked at Kalen. "And I want our main deflector dish to start resonating. Match the frequency of their illegal energy draw. We're going to do more than just show them the bill. We're going to make them feel it." The time for subtlety was over. It was time for a reckoning written in the language of physics and delivered with the cold fury of righteous indignation. The mirror was about to be turned upon them. The corridor of law shimmered back into existence. Thorn stood at his lectern, the cold, sterile light of the virtual chamber feeling less like a courtroom and more like an operating theater. He was here to excise a cancer. Proctor Valerius materialized opposite him, his robed form radiating a renewed, almost smug confidence. He believed the scan had yielded nothing. He believed his 80-year-old crime was buried too deep for any human sensor to find. He was about to learn that human memory amplified by a machine mind has a very long reach. The inquiry is reconvened. The arbiters announced their voices a single resonant chord. The Terran vessel has completed its forensic scan. Commander Thorn, you may present your findings. Thorn gave a slight, formal nod. He did not look at the proctor. He looked at the vast, empty space between them, a space he was about to fill with an undeniable and terrible truth. Arbiters, he began, his voice steady and clear. Our findings are conclusive. The Krathan hegemony's claim of wardship is predicated on a foundational falsehood. They did not save Sanctuary. They orphaned it. The last word was a hammer blow delivered with quiet precision. This is an outrage, Valerius boomed, his composure instantly shattering. An unsubstantiated, slanderous accusation. But the arbiters silenced him with a simple, unified command. Proceed. Commander. Thorn gestured, and behind him the data Logos had prepared bloomed into existence. It was a reconstruction of the Kepler 186 system from 80 years prior. A single human vessel, the Odyssey, was shown in stable orbit. This was the colony ship, Thorn stated. Self-sufficient, its crew and passengers healthy, preparing for the final stage of their terraforming mission. The scale of their lie was about to be laid bare for the galaxy to see. The simulation showed 3 Krathan vessels dropping out of faster-than-light travel. The hegemony fleet arrives, Thorn narrated, his voice a cold monotone. They do not hail the Odyssey. They do not offer assistance. The simulation paused, zooming in on the lead Krathan ship, the Proctor's own flagship, the Benevolence. A weapon port slid open. Instead, they do this. A beam of incandescent plasma erupted from the Benevolence, striking the Odyssey amidships. The colony ship, a vessel of peace and hope, disintegrated in a silent, horrifying flash of light. The truth has a weight all its own, and in that moment it was crushing. The energy signature of the discharge. Logos's synthesized voice announced, filling the chamber, is a 99.97% match for the primary spinal cannon of a Krathan Dominator-class vessel. The wreckage, whose location we have pinpointed, confirms the point of impact and the nature of the weapon used. The data scrolled across the display, a torrent of numbers and graphs that were as damning as a signed confession. They murdered over 1,000 people on that ship, Thorn said, finally turning his gaze to Valerius. They destroyed the colonists' only way home. Then they descended to the planet, posing as saviors, and presented the survivors with a bill for their own damnation. On the bridge of the Indemnity, the main deflector dish began to glow, a soft, sympathetic resonance building deep within the ship's core. Kalen watched his console, his knuckles white. Frequency lock achieved. Commander, he whispered into his comms link, his voice audible only to Thorn. We are mirroring their planetary energy tithe. They are now feeling the exact drain they've been imposing on Sanctuary for 8 decades. The cost of their cruelty was being returned to sender. In the corridor of law, the proctor's form began to flicker. A look of confusion, then alarm, crossed his face. He clutched his lectern as if the floor were tilting beneath him. What is this? What are you doing? He stammered, his voice losing its polished edge. Thorn did not answer him. He addressed the arbiters. The Krathan created the disaster. They fabricated the debt. Every kilowatt of energy, every gram of resources tithed from Sanctuary under the guise of gratitude was in fact the proceeds of a crime. It was theft on a scale that beggars the imagination. Justice is not merely the absence of oppression. It is the presence of a balanced ledger. The arbiters' light columns shimmered intensely. They were processing the data, the simulation, the undeniable physics of the crime. The proctor, meanwhile, was growing more agitated. This is a trick, a manipulation of data. The Terran ship is attacking us, he shrieked, his dignity stripped away, leaving only raw, cornered fury. We are monitoring all energy signatures. Proctor Valerius the Arbiters replied, their tone glacial. The Terran vessel is not attacking. It is resonating. It is demonstrating a principle of accounting. Your fleet is experiencing a power drain equivalent to the one you have imposed. We find the demonstration illustrative. The law in its purest form is a mirror. A new set of numbers appeared on the main display, calculated by Logos. A single astronomical figure representing the total value of resources and energy extorted from Sanctuary over 80 years. This is the true debt, Thorn stated, his voice ringing with authority. And it is not owed by Sanctuary to the hegemony. It is owed by the hegemony to the people of Sanctuary. He had taken their primary weapon, the concept of a perpetual, unpayable debt, and turned it back against them. Their own invention would be their undoing. In a small, dusty town on the planet's surface, Ilara and her father watched as the Krathan cargo haulers, which were in the process of lifting off with the weekly tithe, suddenly faltered. Their anti-gravity engines sputtered, dimmed, and failed. The massive ships settled back onto the launch pads with a groan of stressed metal. A collective gasp went through the onlookers. For the first time in living memory, the tribute had stopped. It was a miracle delivered not by a god, but by an accountant. The proctor's image in the corridor was now degrading badly, the energy drain on his flagship, affecting the systems that maintained the quantum link. This inquiry is a farce, he snarled, his form dissolving into static. The hegemony does not recognize its authority. He was trying to sever the connection to run from the judgment he knew was coming. But it was too late. The evidence is conclusive, the arbiters declared, their voices cutting through his protests. The Krathan hegemony's claim of wardship is invalidated. It is found to be based on fraud, piracy, and mass murder. The gratitude tithe is declared null and void, effective immediately. The first stone of the prison had been dislodged, but Thorn knew it wasn't enough. Freeing them from the debt was meaningless as long as they wore the collars. Arbiters, he said quickly, before the session could be closed. There is the matter of the instruments of collection, the so-called gratitude collars. They are tools of coercion linked to a now proven criminal enterprise. We demand their immediate deactivation. This was the second, more critical phase of the battle. It was one thing to void a contract. It was another to physically remove the shackles. The demand is logical, the arbiters concurred. Proctor Valerius, you are ordered to transmit the master deactivation codes for the planetary collar network. Failure to comply will result in a galactic warrant for your arrest and the seizure of your fleet. The Proctor's distorted image let out a final defiant roar of static before vanishing completely. He had cut the link. He was choosing to be a fugitive rather than a liberator, a foolish final act of spite. But Thorn had anticipated it. He was counting on it. "Kalen, he's out," Thorn said into his comm. "He's not going to release them." On the bridge, Kalen nodded grimly. "We're ready, sir. Logos has the back door." During the forensic scan, the AI had done more than just look for energy signatures. It had mapped the entire Krathan command and control network, finding the digital wellspring from which the collar control signal flowed. It found the key to the cage. Logos Thorn commanded, his voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel. "Execute. True freedom is not given, it is taken back." "Compliance," the AI replied. The indemnity's sensor dish, still focused on the Krathan fleet, changed its modulation. It was no longer just mirroring an energy drain. It was now broadcasting a complex packet of code, a digital ghost key aimed at the Proctor's flagship. It bypassed the ship's firewalls, navigated its internal networks, and found the master transmitter for the collar system. It was a violation of a dozen interstellar treaties, a cyber attack that could have started a war. But in this context, it was an act of liberation. On Sanctuary, the world held its breath. The old teacher Ben stood with his students watching the Krathan ships hang silently in the sky. And then it happened. A soft click, almost too quiet to notice. On the back of his neck, the collar he had worn for 60 years went cold. The faint, oppressive violet light died. He reached up his hand trembling and touched the smooth, dead metal. He was free. Across the planet, in homes and factories, in fields and mines, millions of identical clicks echoed. A wave of stunned silence was followed by a single collective sob of relief. Then came the cheers. A sound of pure, unadulterated joy that had not been heard on Sanctuary for 80 years. Thorn allowed a single deep breath. He had not realized he had been holding it. The first cost of victory was the violation of protocol, a risk that could have ended his career. He had gambled his ship and his crew on the word of his AI. "Jenna," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Open a planet-wide channel. Find me that administrator Marcus. Let's see what gratitude sounds like when it isn't forced at the end of a biofeedback collar." The image of Marcus flickered into the corridor of law. But it was a different man. He stood tall, the weariness in his eyes replaced by a fierce, burning light. The dead collar hung loosely around his neck, a discarded relic. He was not looking at Thorn, but through him at the unseen audience of the galaxy. We remember," he said, his voice cracking, not with fear, but with the weight of generations of suppressed truth. "We remember the Odyssey. We remember the sky burning. They told us we were lucky. They told us we were saved." He took a ragged breath. "We are human. We are not their property. And we are free." The right of sentient affirmation had been exercised not as a legal clause but as a roar of defiance. The Arbiter's light columns glowed with a new intensity. Their work was not done. "The matter of restitution remains," they announced. The number Logos had calculated the total value of the stolen tithe reappeared on the display. "This debt is hereby transferred to the Krathan hegemony. A lien is placed upon all hegemony assets effective immediately. The funds will be administered by the Terran Mandate and paid as reparations to the people of Sanctuary. The public ledgers will be amended." The mirror had not just shown them their crime. It had become their sentence. A debt for a debt measure for measure. The second cost of victory became apparent on the Indemnities Bridge. The main deflector pushed far beyond its design specifications to both mirror the energy drain and broadcast the deactivation key began to emit a high-pitched whine. Warning lights flashed on Kalen's console. "Commander, the dish is overloading. We have microfractures forming in the emitter array." "We have to shut it down," Kalen yelled. Thorn nodded. "Do it. Its work is done." The resonating hum ceased. The ship shuddered once, then fell silent. The weapon of justice had cost them a piece of their shield, a price they had willingly paid. "This inquiry is concluded," the arbiters declared. "A new precedent is now locked into the Galactic Compact. The doctrine known as the gratitude tithe is hereby reclassified as predatory servitude and is declared illegal for any signatory power to practice or impose. Violators will face immediate sanction and forfeiture of all assets. Let the ledgers be so recorded." This was the true victory, the one that would echo through the stars. They had not just freed one world, they had broken the chain for any world that might be similarly enslaved in the future. The law had been sharpened into a better sword. The corridor of law dissolved. Thorn was back on his command deck. The scent of ozone from the strained deflector dish was thick in the air. Before him on the main viewer, the Krathan fleet was in disarray. Without the steady flow of energy from the planet, their own systems were strained. One by one, their engines flared, and they fled, disappearing into the blackness of space like the thieves they were. They left behind a world that was for the first time in 3 generations its own. The public ledger entry blinked on the main screen, a simple, stark line of text against the starfield. Precedent. I3 Gamma predatory servitude. Gratitude tithe doctrine ruled unlawful. Krythan hegemony assets frozen pending reparations. Status confirmed. The ship's mirror arrays, which had focused the deflector's energy, slowly cooled their faint glow, dimming to nothing. Thorn looked at the faces of his crew at the exhaustion, and the fierce pride etched upon them. He had won. They had won. But the victory felt heavy. It was a victory born from an ancient crime paid for with the ghosts of the Odyssey. Justice was not a clean, triumphant thing. It was a repair. It was a balancing of accounts that should never have been in deficit. It was the hard, quiet work of making things right long after they had gone so terribly wrong. We did not come here to teach them fear. We came to remind them that some debts cannot be collected, and that humanity keeps a very, very careful ledger.